My guest this week is the England rugby player, Maro Itoje. He's tackled players on the pitch and politicians to try and help poorer children. I want to ask him what fires him up the most and how do you prepare to run at someone and tackle them? Thank you so much for being here. It's lovely to have you in the studio. And I thought I'd start I'm someone who studied politics at university, and I know you also studied it and have a big interest in it. And I wonder, now you're a sports star, how political are you allowed to be, or how much is that part of who you are?
Well, I guess there's no real limit to how political you want to be. I guess it's down to, individual choice and freedom and how much you want to, delve into that world. Politics, as you said, is something I studied at uni. I did it at secondary school as well. And even since graduating, it's something that I've always had a keen interest in.
I think it's in our minds a bit more about sports stars and politics because of the Men's World Cup and what's been going on or what's not been going on there. And I wonder, with that and that discussion around that whole piece, do you think it is actually important for sports stars to stand up and to make some noise about issues that they care about and about human rights?
Yeah, so I do think it's important for athletes, sports stars to, have their opinions heard, as long as, they have an opinion on it. I'm not too comfortable with the rhetoric of stars or sports stars or athletes being forced to take positions that they're not comfortable with, or maybe they just don't have an opinion at all. But by all means, if there is something that you believe in, if there's a stance or a position or, a campaign that you want to be involved in, I think athletes should feel emboldened to do so.
Because there's a change, isn't there, on that front? And it was interesting, Gary Lineker was on this programme not long ago, and he was saying he feels bad for athletes and sports stars in some ways because they can't win. If they try and say something, they get told, get back in your box, perhaps by some, especially politicians may say it. If they don't say something, they can also be attacked for that. So it's quite a difficult terrain in some ways.
It is. It's not easy. And I think the best way of navigating that space is just try to be, authentic. I think if you're authentic, whether people like it or they don't like it, at least you're authentic to yourself, is when perhaps you jump on a campaign because it's popular, or you don't really know what you're talking about with regards to a certain issue or topic. That's when it can be a little bit wishy-washy. But I think if it comes from an authentic place, and you can always tell, if it comes from an authentic place, then by all means, go ahead.
Well, do you follow football? Is that allowed as a rugby star?
I'm an Arsenal fan.
Okay.
So
I never presume anything.
Yeah.
It's not always the same groups that follow the same things and the same interests. But do you think the England men's team have been bold enough? We saw the German team put their hands over their mouth in reference to Qatar censorship and all of that.
I think the men's football team, and not only just now, but if you look at what they've done over the last 18 months, 24 months, in some of the positions they've held for across different campaigns, I think they've done a lot. They've done a lot to push the conversation forward. I think they've done a lot to raise awareness, or, just try and move the needle a little bit. You can always make an argument that you could do more, you could do less, but the focus should be on the people who are organising the event. The focus should be on the administrators to make whatever stance that they want to make. I think they have a track record of doing good and, standing up for things they believe in. You
did step into British politics a little bit with a small p during the lockdown, the COVID lockdowns, when you talked about the need for children to have access to laptops and to bridge that digital divide when we were having schools shut and education was being interrupted. Why did you choose to do that, and how did you find that experience?
I guess why I chose to do it, it was brought to my attention, this campaign, I guess. This campaign wasn't started by me. It was started, there's been a lot of people who've been doing some good work in that space. But essentially, there was the gap between the haves and the have-nots was getting wider and wider with regards to children's education. And education is often what we talk about in society as, the great leveler, is the tool we use for social mobility. It's the tool we use to get people out of poverty. And what was happening in that situation in lockdown was those who had money, who could afford data, had iPads, had computers, laptops, etc., were able to continue with their education, and those who didn't were falling further and further behind. The people who were falling further and further behind were the exact people who, we needed to help, who needed education perhaps more so than others. So that was, the driving force behind myself getting involved in that campaign. And how was the experience? It was a cool experience. It was good. It was nice to know that you're having an impact on some children's lives in however small of a way.
Do you what's the latest on that? I mean, I know we're not in lockdowns anymore, thankfully, but that's been a concern, hasn't it? The exacerbation of inequality, and we're starting to see some of the results of what happened to children, especially during that time. Do you have any update on that? Do you stay in touch with it?
So the digital divide, obviously, is in a slightly better position now because children are back at school. They're attending classes. Their normal school life, as it were, has resumed. But the digital divide is still something that is ongoing. The
then Education Secretary of the UK, Gavin Williamson, high-profile British politician, he confused you with a different black sports star, the footballer for Manchester United, England national, Marcus Rashford. Do you remember when you heard about that, where you were and what your reaction was?
Yeah, it was all a little bit odd, to be honest. So I think I was at home, and then I just noticed my phone was like pinging off with notifications, and I was a little bit confused what was going on. So then people started sending me articles, then I looked at what was going on. So then it all started to make sense to me.
I mean, were you dismayed? Were you shocked? I mean,
it was all very, very surprising. It was all very surprising. The story was that I think he was undertaking an interview, and he confused me with Marcus Rashford, or vice versa. I can't quite remember. It was all a bit surprising, but he did, he called me thereafter. We spoke. He apologized. So
what was that conversation like?
It was fine.
Okay.
It was fine. He called. He said it was honest mistake, and he hopes I took no offense to it. But he said it was a long interview, and he, just messed up his words.
Right. Okay. Well, it's always good to be able to ask people when they've been in the middle of something how it was for them. Let's talk about what you do, which is obviously play rugby at the highest possible level. I love getting into, which we're going to get into, what people eat, just generally. And I know you have to eat certain things to get through this and keep up a certain level. But how do you prepare before a tournament?
How do you prepare? I guess it happens in many stages, I guess. Before a tournament, I think the first part of preparation is physical preparation. So getting yourself in the right physical prep, and every athlete, that would look a little bit different. But for me, that involves a load of fitness work, a load of strength work. I was fortunate enough to go to Portland this summer with Under Armour. We did a little pre-season camp there, just getting the body right, recovering well, exposing myself to new and different type of training methods. But yeah, it's just a mixture of physical recovery, physical preparation, mental preparation. Then once that's done, the team gets together and the team trains to get going.
What's the mental preparation like?
Well, it's mainly around like performance, really. So it's for me. So when I mentally prepare for games, it's visualizing what situations may happen. It's getting myself emotionally right for games. Rugby is a very emotional, game. It's,
in what way? I wouldn't necessarily have thought of that word.
It's when I say emotion, like it's not normal to run at people. It's not normal to hit people. It's not normal to get in a scrum and launch yourself at someone else. So and all those actions, for it to be effective, you need to have a certain level of emotion in that. You need to care about what you're doing. There needs to be like it's not just something, just sending an email. Is a much more emotive sport.
Is there anyone in public life or famous that you've ever thought that would be quite good fun to tackle?
Well, there was. I'm pretty sure. I remember. I think there was a clip of Boris Johnson tackling a kid.
There is.
Running with a rugby ball,
which was an interesting look.
Yeah. I think. I think he either tackled him or ran completely over him.
Yeah, he made sure he beat him.
He definitely beat him. Whoever it was, he beat him. But who would I like to tackle? I'm not sure,
But it sounded like you wanted to take on Boris Johnson at that point for that kid.
Maybe the kid would tap me in, I'll help him out. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't normally
think of it like
that.
No, fair enough. You talk about children and the next generation. I know you were 11 when you started playing, and things change, like you're talking about your nutrition as well. And there has been a lot of talk lately about safety and also in particular headgear and how to protect players, professional players and younger, to protect their heads. Are you concerned about that and some of the issues that have been raised about concerns about long-term memory issues and the need for helmets of some kind?
I think, as a player, you have to be, or you don't have to be, but it's more than reasonable to be concerned about the long-term effects of the game, especially in this current climate where it's, come to the forefront and it's, in the news a lot. And when we have former players who've come out and said, or come out and they now have issues which go back to their playing days resulting from concussion. So it's more than sensible or reasonable to be concerned with that. What I would say, and the only caveat to that, which makes me more comfortable with continuing to play rugby, is the protocols and systems that we have as players now in comparison to the early 2000s, the early 2010s is way different.
Is it?
Way different. In terms of even not only the processes, but in terms of the culture in and around concussion is totally different. So I started playing rugby in 2006 at my school, and probably from about 2006 to about 2013, 14 or so, what I experienced was the culture within rugby that the concussion wasn't really seen as a serious injury. So if someone was to, get concussed or get knocked out on the field, it was almost seen as an act of weakness for them to come off the field as a result of their head knock. However, now it's almost the complete opposite. Once someone has a head knock, your teammates are no longer telling you, hey, come on, get up, we need you. They're thinking about that person or that individual first. They're saying, no, you need to get out because you need to look after your head. So even the culture in and around the conversation has shifted immeasurably. And in addition to that, more science, more medical research. So, I recently went through a concussion protocol last summer, so I'm quite familiar with the process. And it's very, very thorough now in comparison to what it was.
Do you think helmets should be the norm?
Well, I'm no scientist, I'm no doctor, so I'll just caveat that with regards to anything I say. But not all scrum hats are proven to stop concussion or reduce concussion. I know there's a scrum hat on the market now that makes that claim. However, I'm not too sure on the actual scientific research behind it. So it's not as easy as saying wear a scrum hat, then that reduces your likelihood of concussion. So it's a bit more complicated than that.
The women's game, the women's rugby game, which is coming up, just like it's actually probably behind where the women's football game is in terms of still reach and popularity. But there was a piece I read recently which said that for the first time ever, the men's game could learn perhaps something from the women's game when it comes to how many head injuries or head assessments there are, just because of playing properly and doing things in a certain way. I wonder what you make of the women's game in comparison, and also the influence of that. Is that something that features when you're thinking about how to play and the team?
The two very different. The two, obviously we both play rugby, but the two very different styles and of the game. And are there things that we can learn? Of course, the things that we can learn, and vice versa. But what I think has been amazing has been the growth of the women's game over the last 10 years. In terms of skill, in terms of participation, in terms of viewing. Recently there was the Women's World Cup, and it was in New Zealand, and the amount of people that I knew that were waking up at like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. to watch their game and to see their growth, even in England, has been amazing. The only shame is that it was in New Zealand. If that World Cup was in England or in a time zone which was a bit more friendly to, English viewers, I think we would have seen a similar phenomenon to what we saw with the women's football.
We'll see how that goes. Just on the point of view of safety, not necessarily to do with concussion or headwear, do your family struggle to watch you play? Do they get nervous about you getting hurt still? Or?
I don't think so.
I know you're at the top of your game.
No, I don't think so. It used to be my mum, but now...
Did she find it difficult?
I think she used to find the collisions made her wince a little bit, but I don't think so. They don't express to me that anytime I'm injured, they're always like, oh, be careful, be careful, be careful. But I don't think they struggle too much with that aspect of the game. They come to pretty much every game.
They do, okay.
So if they do struggle, it's not stopping them from coming to watch the games.
What would you say the culture of the rugby community is like as a player? We hear a lot about football, we hear a lot about abuse, a lot about things needing to improve. Do you think rugby has got it in a better place? I
think rugby is miles ahead of football. I think rugby, you can never go to I'm an Arsenal fan, you can't go to the Emirates and have Arsenal and Tottenham fans sitting right next to each other and expect a fight not to happen or, the police not to swarm in. You can go to Saracens, our London rivals, Harlequins. You can go to any Saracens, Harlequins game. Saracens fans will be sitting here, Harlequins fans will be sitting here. And that's the same with, international rugby and with international rivalry. So it was England-Wales in the football recently. If that was in rugby, you have English fans sitting here, Welsh fans sitting here. They'll both be drinking together, laughing together.
That's happened a lot, England and Wales in rugby.
They'll both be fiercely supporting their teams, but the dynamic and the whole atmosphere is totally different. So
why do you think that is? I mean, there's that quote, isn't there? I always get it wrong, so I've written it down. Football is a game for gents played by hooligans, and rugby's a game for hooligans played by gentlemen. I mean, I don't know if that ever rang true.
Yeah, I don't know. That's the old adage, isn't it? But I don't know. I think the spirit within rugby is just totally different, especially amongst the supporters. It's I think rugby supporters perhaps go to games to have a good time as opposed to go to games to, hurl abuse at one another. Maybe that's probably the key difference.
Yeah, but it's just interesting how it's grown up completely differently in that way, and why that is. I mean, do you think more kids also should be exposed to rugby? You talk about the digital divide, but especially in the UK, especially in England, there's a real class divide about who gets to play rugby some of the time, not all of the time, but football is generally offered at all schools. Rugby is not.
Yeah, rugby needs to grow. Rugby needs to grow, and rugby needs to look at ways in which it can expand into different markets, different areas, different schools, different demographics, because rugby as a sport, it needs to grow, and it needs to go into these markets that don't typically play rugby or aren't typically associated with rugby in order to achieve that growth. I think rugby is very good at singing to the choir. Where I think rugby can improve is in its outreach, is how it's marketed, is in how it tries to get new people to come into the fold.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how that changes also maybe with the women's game and the appeal of how that moves on. You've said you don't want to be a pundit, actually, and I'm not trying to bring your career to a close, but what's that like, though, when you try and think beyond? Because you obviously do have a lot of interests, and it isn't inauthentic for you to share views on things. What else takes your fancy, do you reckon?
Oh, what other things am I interested in?
Yeah, no, to perhaps be for the future.
Oh, well, I think, I think retirement from rugby is something that is in the back of pretty much all rugby players or all athletes' minds, and I think it's important to have a think about it, and so you can plan that next stage. I'm a big African art enthusiast. The dream one day will be to have a gallery, an African art gallery. So hopefully we can make that happen. I want to do a bit more philanthropic work. I want to be involved in a bit of business. Probably want to go into business after rugby.
So how old are you now?
I'm 28.
And when is a retirement age-ish?
I'm thinking mid-30s.
Okay.
I'm thinking like 35.
And then you're done.
I think that'd be a good time to wrap it up. So I still got a little bit of running in these old legs yet.
Yes, you do, and you've got some work to do before France.
We do.
It's lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you for being with us. Until we meet again, take care and goodbye.